Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when one Hollywood's most outspoken legends sits across from one of America's most composed news anchors, and the topic turns personal? That's exactly what happened when Samuel L. Jackson joined George Stephanopoulos live on Good Morning America for what was supposed to be a calm discussion on a sensitive question. Should divorce laws be stricter to protect families? What started as a routine morning segment quickly spiraled into a raw, emotional clash that stunned both the audience and viewers at home. Samuel, known for his unfiltered honesty, didn't hold back. He argued that marriage has become a disposable promise and that families and children are paying the price. George pushed back, saying stricter laws would punish people stuck in toxic relationships, not protect them. At first, the exchange was civil, but as both men revealed the deep personal experiences behind their beliefs, things took a turn. Voices rose, tempers flared, the studio fell silent. By the time the segment ended, one man's passion and another's composure created one of Good Morning America's most unforgettable live moments. What followed was an on-air confrontation that blurred the line between debate and confession, and left America asking, when love fails, should the law step in to save the family? The Good Morning America studio gleamed under its signature sunrise backdrop, golden lights spilling through digital windows as cameras panned across the glass table. George Stephanopoulos smiled toward the audience, composed as always, his notes stacked neatly in front of him. Beside him sat Robin Roberts, who gave her co-host a quick nod before turning to introduce the guest. And joining us this morning, Robin began, her tone bright but teasing, is a man who never shies away from saying what's on his mind, Academy Award winner Samuel L. Jackson. The crowd broke into applause as Samuel walked out, wearing a charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and his trademark glasses. He waved, smiling politely, but there was a spark in his eyes, the kind that said he hadn't come for small talk. George leaned in as Samuel took his seat. "Good to see you again, Sam." "You too, George," Samuel replied, settling comfortably. "But I have a feeling this one's going to get spicy." That drew a few laughs from the audience. Robin continued, "This morning we're asking a tough question. Should divorce laws be stricter to protect families? We've seen rising divorce rates, shorter marriages, and more children caught in the middle. Samuel, you've been married for decades. What's your take?" Samuel's expression shifted, half serious, half amused. "You're right, Robin. I've been married to the same woman for over 40 years. And let me tell you, it wasn't all sunshine and jazz. We fought, we grew, we stuck it out. But that's what family is. These days, people quit before the fight even starts. Marriage used to be a promise. Now it's just paperwork." The audience murmured, some nodding, some uneasy. George raised an eyebrow. "You think people are giving up too easily?" "Absolutely," Samuel said. "The second things get hard, people run. They say, 'I'm unhappy,' and lawyers line up like it's a Black Friday sale. Nobody asks, 'Can we fix it?' anymore. It's just, 'What's my half worth?'" Robin chuckled nervously, trying to keep things light. "So you're saying maybe divorce laws should make it a little harder?" Samuel turned to her. "I'm saying maybe they should make people think before they jump ship. If you know it's not so easy to walk away, you might try harder to stay." George tapped his pen against the desk, thoughtful but skeptical. "But Sam, isn't that risky? What about people stuck in bad marriages? Shouldn't they have the right to leave without being punished by the law?" Samuel didn't miss a beat. "Of course they should. I'm not talking about abuse or danger. I'm talking about convenience. Too many folks are divorcing out of boredom or pride. That's not freedom, that's neglect." The crowd gave a few claps of agreement, but George wasn't convinced. He leaned in, his voice measured. "I understand what you're saying about commitment, but laws can't measure emotion. If two people don't love each other anymore, forcing them to stay married doesn't protect the family. It breaks it in a different way." Samuel smiled, but it was the kind of smile that came before a punchline with teeth. "Yeah, but maybe we wouldn't have so many broken families if we stopped treating love like it expires every year." That line hit hard. The audience reacted with a mix of applause and murmurs, but George kept his composure. But don't you think stricter divorce laws could hurt people, financially, emotionally, especially women who might already be struggling? Samuel sighed, shaking his head. You're missing what I'm saying, man. This isn't about punishing people, it's about reminding them. Marriage isn't a test drive, it's a covenant. You don't quit every time the tires go flat. Even Robin smiled at that. That's quite an image, Sam. Samuel laughed. Hey, it's true. Everybody wants the wedding, the photos, the honeymoon, but when life hits, they start looking for an exit. My wife and I went through hell some years, but we fixed it because we meant what we said at that altar. The applause came again, this time louder. George, though, wasn't done. That's admirable, Sam, but isn't it a little unfair to hold everyone to your experience? Not every couple can or should force something that's already dead. Samuel leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. Maybe it wouldn't die so easily if people fed it more than once a year. The audience burst into laughter. Even George cracked a reluctant grin. But there was steel under the humor. Look, Samuel continued, I'm not saying stay miserable. I'm saying stop making marriage disposable. If we make divorce harder, maybe people will take marriage more seriously. You don't fix the family by making it easier to break. George crossed his arms. But you can't legislate love, Sam. You can't write laws to make people care. True, but you can write laws that remind people love matters, that vows mean something, and that families deserve more effort than convenience. The audience clapped again, this time longer. Even Robin looked moved. George took a slow breath, studying Samuel's face. You make a powerful case, but laws are blunt instruments. What you're talking about is morality, not legality. Maybe morality is what we're missing, and maybe the law used to remind us of it. The applause swelled, some standing, some thoughtful, some uneasy. The chemistry between Samuel's raw conviction and George's measured restraint was magnetic. Robin glanced at the clock. We've got to take a quick break, she said, smiling, though everyone could feel the undercurrent between the two men. When we come back, we'll ask, can laws really protect families, or does it all come down to personal choice? As the cameras pulled back and the theme music swelled, Samuel leaned slightly toward George and said, under his breath, but loud enough for the mic to catch it, You can talk all you want about freedom, George, but freedom without responsibility is just another kind of selfishness. George looked at him, a flicker of challenge in his eyes. And responsibility without compassion is just another kind of control. The camera faded to commercial. The real debate was only just beginning. When Good Morning America returned from the break, the tension on set was almost electric. The upbeat music faded, but the look between Samuel L. Jackson and George Stephanopoulos said everything. The gloves were off now. Robin Roberts, ever the peacekeeper, smiled brightly at the camera. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, we're having quite the conversation this morning. Should divorce laws be stricter to protect families? Samuel L. Jackson believes they should. George Stephanopoulos? Not so much. George chuckled lightly, tapping his pen on the table. Let's just say I believe the answer lies more in compassion than in control. Samuel turned his chair slightly toward him, calm but ready. Control? You call accountability control? Man, that's half our problem right there. Every time someone talks about responsibility, somebody else yells control. The audience murmured, half in laughter, half in agreement. George met his gaze evenly. I'm all for accountability, Sam, but laws don't fix hearts. If two people fall out of love, stricter laws won't rebuild that bond. It'll just trap them in resentment. Samuel leaned forward. Resentment happens when you stop working at something. Marriage isn't a vacation, George. It's a job. You don't quit because you're tired. You show up anyway. The crowd clapped hard, the sound echoing through the studio. George smiled, unshaken. But people aren't employees in a company. You can't mandate emotional labor. Some marriages simply don't work, and keeping people tied together can cause more damage than the divorce itself. Robin stepped in softly. George, are you saying divorce is sometimes the healthiest choice? He nodded. Absolutely. When you remove the shame around it, people can start over without guilt. Life is long. We grow. We change. Some relationships can't evolve together. Samuel's brow lifted. And what about the kids left picking up those broken pieces? What about the people who don't get to start over so easily? Kids aren't baggage, they're witnesses. Every time we make divorce easy, we tell the next generation that promises don't matter. That line hung in the air like a heavy truth. The audience was quiet now. George didn't flinch, but Sam, forcing parents to stay in unhappy marriages doesn't protect the kids either. It teaches them that misery is normal. Kids learn just as much from watching a toxic relationship as they do from watching one end. Robin turned toward Samuel. Sam, George brings up a good point. What do you say to that? Samuel nodded slowly, thinking. I say it's not about forcing anyone to stay. It's about thinking twice before walking out. We'd made leaving easier than staying. That's backward. George crossed his arms. But who decides what's too easy? The government? You think politicians should get to dictate how long someone suffers in a broken marriage? Samuel's tone sharpened. You're twisting it. I'm not saying we should lock people in their homes. I'm saying maybe, just maybe, the law should remind people that marriage means something sacred. We regulate everything else that's valuable, money, property, contracts, but when it comes to family, the most valuable thing we have, we say, do whatever you feel. That's crazy. The applause came again, loud, approving, raw. George shot back. You're talking about government interference in the most personal part of life. Freedom means people get to make choices, even if you don't like them. Samuel leaned forward, voice steady but forceful. Freedom isn't the same thing as doing whatever you want, George. Freedom is the chance to do what's right, and right now we've lost sight of that. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shaking their heads. Robin could barely cut in over the noise. Gentlemen, let's keep this civil, she said, though her smile suggested she knew this moment would go viral. Samuel continued, lowering his tone but not his fire. You know what I see? I see families breaking because people treat love like a subscription service. Cancel any time. That's not freedom, that's failure. George raised a hand, a gesture of patience. And I see people finally brave enough to admit when something isn't working. Staying together just for appearances or for fear of judgment, that's not love either. That's a performance. Samuel's jaw tightened. Marriage is a performance sometimes. You show up even when you don't want to. That's how love survives, by doing the work. But now people want the benefits without the sacrifice. That's not love. That's selfishness. A few audience members stood up to clap. Robin looked torn between admiration and alarm. George leaned in slightly, his voice calm but cutting. So what's next, Sam? A law that forces people to attend marriage counseling? A fine for divorce? You can't legislate moral courage. Samuel smirked. You can't legislate it, but you can stop rewarding the lack of it. We've built the system that makes walking away easier than fixing things. Maybe we should flip that. George sighed. You can't fix people, Sam, and you can't force love to last. Sometimes the most loving thing two people can do is let each other go. Samuel's tone softened but deepened. Yeah, but what if we stopped letting go so easily? What if we stayed long enough to see what love could have become? The audience went silent again. Robin glanced at George. He looked momentarily speechless, searching for the right words. Finally, he said, That's beautiful, Sam, but not every love story ends with redemption. Some end with survival, and survival is worth protecting, too. Samuel gave a small nod of respect, though his eyes stayed locked on George's. Fair, but we shouldn't make survival our only goal. Families deserve more than that. They deserve commitment, the kind that costs you something. That last line drew the biggest applause yet. The crowd rose to its feet. George managed a polite smile, but there was no mistaking the tension. The ideological divide between the two men was now crystal clear. Heart versus logic, conviction versus compassion. Robin finally broke the moment, turning toward the camera with a practiced smile. When we come back, we'll open this debate to our audience. Should divorce laws make it harder to walk away, or should love remain a matter of choice? Stay with us. This one's far from over. As the show cut to commercial, Samuel leaned back in his chair, unbothered, while George adjusted his tie. The air between them buzzed like static, civil on the surface, but sparking underneath. They both knew this debate wasn't about laws anymore. It was about what America really believed family meant.
When the cameras came back, The energy in the Good Morning America studio had changed. The conversation wasn't just spirited anymore. It was personal. The audience leaned forward in their seats. Samuel L. Jackson had his hands clasped, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on George Stephanopoulos. George, usually the calmest man in the room, now looked like he was measuring every word before saying it. Robin Roberts sensed it too. She tried to ease the tension. "This debate's hitting close to home for a lot of folks," she said. "Maybe we can take it one step deeper. Sam, you've been married for decades. You've seen both the struggle and the staying power. Why does this issue mean so much to you personally?" Samuel took a breath, leaning back, his voice quieter but heavier. "Because I've lived it. My wife and I, we've had moments where walking away felt easier. When careers pulled us in opposite directions, when pride got in the way, when we stopped talking for weeks." He paused. "But you stay. You learn to fight the problem, not each other. And when you make it through one of those storms, the love that comes after is stronger than anything before." The audience broke into soft applause. His tone wasn't angry anymore. It was reflective, real. George nodded respectfully but jumped in. "I respect that deeply, Sam, truly. But not everyone's marriage looks like yours. Some people stay because they're scared, of judgment, of financial ruin, of being alone. Should the law really make it harder for them to escape something that's already breaking them?" Samuel looked him dead in the eye. "You keep using the word escape, George. Marriage isn't a prison. It's a vow. And sometimes honoring that vow means fighting through what's hard, not running from it." George's expression softened slightly, but his tone stayed measured. "I'm not saying we should encourage divorce, but you can't ignore reality. Some homes aren't just unhappy, they're unsafe. People trapped in emotional or physical abuse shouldn't face extra legal obstacles to leave." Samuel nodded slowly. "You're right about that. I'd never want laws that endanger anyone. But we've swung so far in the other direction that now, the second someone feels uncomfortable, they call it quits. That's not courage. That's culture teaching us that endurance is old-fashioned." The audience murmured. It was hard to tell which side they were on. Robin turned to George. "George, you're a journalist, but also a husband and father. Has this debate ever hit home for you, personally?" George hesitated. "It has. I've seen friends lose themselves trying to save something that couldn't be saved. I've seen children finally breathe again once their parents stopped fighting. Divorce isn't always a failure. It can be a reset." Samuel's tone turned sharper. "But at what cost? We've made divorce a reset, like it's a phone app. Marriage isn't supposed to be disposable." George looked pained. "And yet, Sam, some marriages are. We have to stop pretending every union is sacred if it's built on lies, manipulation, or misery. The law should help people rebuild their lives, not chain them to a mistake." The word mistake seemed to hit him like a spark to dry wood. He leaned in, eyes narrow but voice controlled. "So love's a mistake now? Family's a mistake? That's what we're teaching the next generation? Don't try too hard, just quit when it gets messy?" George raised his hand defensively. "No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we should protect people's freedom to leave if staying destroys them." Samuel's voice dropped low. "Freedom without responsibility is chaos. And that's what we got now. Chaos in families, chaos in values, because no one wants to pay the price of keeping something alive." The audience broke into divided applause. Some clapped for George, others for Sam. You could feel the studio pulsing with disagreement. Robin, still trying to hold the middle ground, said, "Maybe both of you are touching on something deeper. This isn't just about law. It's about how our society defines love. Do we see love as permanent or conditional?" Samuel turned toward her, nodding. "Exactly. We've started treating love like it's seasonal. People get married like they're signing up for a trial run. The minute it gets tough, they look for the exit. That's not love, Robin. That's fear." George interjected softly. "Or maybe it's wisdom. Maybe love isn't about permanence, but honesty, knowing when to let go before you destroy each other." Samuel exhaled hard, shaking his head. "You know what my father told me? A man's character shows when he decides what's worth keeping. We've got too many people today who don't keep anything. Not promises, not patience, not people." That line silenced the room. Even George didn't respond right away. The camera caught his expression, respect mixed with discomfort. Finally, he said quietly, "That's powerful, Sam, but character doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it takes more courage to walk away." Samuel looked at him long and steady. "Or maybe it just takes less pain." Robin cleared her throat. "All right," she said, voice lighter, though her eyes betrayed the tension in the air. "We'll take one more break, but when we return, can stricter divorce laws really strengthen families, or do they risk hurting the people they're meant to protect? Don't go anywhere. This conversation isn't over." As the show cut to commercial, the cameras panned across the audience, faces divided between admiration and discomfort. Samuel sat quietly, hands folded, staring into the desk. George took a sip of water, clearly shaken. For the first time that morning, it wasn't about politics or law. It was about pain, the kind that lingers in the silence after love fades.
When the show returned from commercial, the tension felt thicker than the air-conditioned studio. George's polite smile had faded into something tighter, more controlled. Samuel L. Jackson sat perfectly still, arms folded, his expression calm, but there was fire behind his eyes. Robin Roberts gave a careful smile to the camera. "Welcome back to Good Morning America. We're continuing our discussion on whether divorce laws should be stricter to protect families. Before the break, Samuel L. Jackson and George Stephanopoulos had a spirited exchange. A few polite chuckles from the audience. The tension remained. George leaned forward, adjusting his papers like armor. "Sam, I respect your perspective, I really do, but I think you're ignoring how complex families are today. Some people, especially women, stay in bad marriages because they feel trapped. Stricter laws could make that worse." Samuel's reply came cool, even. "And some people bail out because they don't want to grow up. I'm not talking about the ones trapped, George. I'm talking about the ones who quit because marriage stopped being fun." The audience gave a low "ooh," sensing the gloves were coming off. George frowned. "That's unfair, Sam. You're assuming people who divorce are lazy or selfish. You don't know what's happening in their homes." Samuel leaned in slightly, voice rising. "And you're assuming nobody fights for anything anymore. Maybe I've just seen enough to know that love doesn't survive without a fight." Robin tried to cut in. Okay, let's take a breath." But the two men weren't hearing her. George snapped back, his voice tight. "You're speaking from your own success story, Sam. You had a strong marriage. That's great, but that's you. Not everyone's got that foundation. You can't moralize people's pain." Samuel's face hardened. "And you can't excuse every decision just because someone's hurting. Pain's part of life, George. It doesn't always mean you burn the house down." The audience gasped at the metaphor. George tried to stay composed, but his tone sharpened. "That's an easy thing to say when you're not the one living in fear every night wondering how to start over." Samuel's voice dropped low, steady but cutting. "You think I haven't seen fear? You think I don't know what it's like to fight demons in your own house? My wife and I faced addiction, distance, betrayal, and we stayed because we believed in something bigger than ourselves." The audience fell completely silent. Even the camera operator stopped moving. George blinked, thrown off. "I didn't mean—" "No, you did. You meant that marriage only matters when it's easy. But life doesn't hand you easy, man. It hands you choices. You either build or you break. I chose to build." Robin finally jumped in, hands raised. "Gentlemen, please, let's keep this constructive." But the damage was done. George's calm cracked for the first time all morning. "You're acting like anyone who divorces is a coward. That's not compassion, Sam. That's judgment." Samuel slammed his palm lightly on the table, not hard, but loud enough to make everyone flinch. "No, it's truth, and people run from truth because it hurts." A few audience members applauded. Others looked stunned. Robin, clearly rattled, tried to lighten the tension. "Okay, that was, passionate. Maybe we should take one final question from the audience." But George wasn't letting it go. His voice was quieter now, but his anger had cooled into something sharper. "So you think the government should tell people how much pain they have to endure before they're allowed to leave?" Samuel turned to him, slow and deliberate. "I think the government should stop making it so easy to quit on your promises, because when marriage means nothing, families mean nothing." That was the line that cracked the room. Half the audience burst into applause, cheering, clapping, even whistling. The other half booed, some shaking their heads. The noise filled the studio. George exhaled, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "That's not protecting families, Sam. That's controlling them." Samuel stood up slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow over the desk. "You've got all the answers, George, but I'll tell you this. Laws may not save families, but indifference sure as hell destroys them." He turned toward the audience, gave a brief nod, and started to walk off the set. The crowd erupted in stunned noise, some gasping, others clapping in disbelief. George just sat there, looking down at his notes, jaw tight. Robin placed her hand on his arm, whispering something off mic. The cameras caught one last shot of Samuel L. Jackson disappearing behind the stage curtain. The debate about divorce laws had turned into something deeper, a mirror of what happens when conviction and compassion collide. And this time, conviction walked out first. When Good Morning America returned from its final commercial break, the energy in the studio was completely different. The applause sign blinked, but the audience didn't need it. People were already buzzing, whispering to one another about what they had just witnessed. Samuel L. Jackson had walked off live television. George Stephanopoulos sat quietly, his hands folded on the desk. Robin Roberts looked composed but uneasy, her professional smile struggling to mask the tension still hanging in the air. She cleared her throat softly. "If you're just joining us, we've had a very passionate conversation this morning about whether divorce laws should be stricter to protect families. Things got heated, and while we respect everyone's right to their opinions, we also want to take a moment to bring this back to what really matters: understanding." George nodded slightly, but his eyes stayed distant, thoughtful. "You know, Robin, what we saw just now, that's what this debate is all about. People care about families. They care so deeply, they fight about how to protect them." Robin turned to him. "Do you regret how it unfolded?" George paused, then exhaled. "No, because Samuel spoke from the heart, and whether you agree with him or not, that kind of honesty is rare these days." He smiled faintly. "I just wish it didn't have to come with so much pain." The camera cut briefly to the audience, some people nodding in agreement, others still visibly stunned. A few clapped quietly. Robin looked directly into the lens. "Marriage, divorce, family, they're not just political issues, they're human ones. Everyone watching has their own story, someone they stayed for or someone they let go." George leaned forward again, softening. "I've interviewed presidents and world leaders, but moments like this, when people stop hiding behind talking points, those are the ones that stick with you. Samuel's right about one thing. Family does matter, but so does the freedom to protect yourself from harm. The challenge is finding the balance between both." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. Robin added quietly, "And maybe that balance isn't something the law can ever really fix. Maybe it's something we each have to find in our own homes, in our own hearts." For a moment, the show felt less like a talk segment and more like a conversation shared across millions of living rooms. The noise, the ego, the applause, it all quieted into something human. Then, as the cameras panned to the audience again, Robin's earpiece buzzed. She looked up, eyes widening slightly, then smiled. "We're hearing now that Samuel L. Jackson has left the building, but he asked us to share one last thing he said off camera." The crowd hushed. Robin read from her notepad. "He said, and I quote, 'Family isn't about perfection, it's about staying when it's hard and leaving when it's right, but whichever you do, do it with love.'" The crowd erupted in applause. Even George smiled, visibly moved. "Now that's the Samuel I know." Robin nodded. "And maybe that's the point. Whether you're fighting for your marriage or finding peace outside it, what matters is the heart behind the choice. Not laws, not opinions, just the love you bring into it." The camera began its slow pullback, capturing the hosts, the audience, and the quiet intensity left in the room. George turned to the viewers. "Today was tough, But sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that remind us what we stand for. Robin smiled, placing a hand on his. And if nothing else, maybe we all walk away today a little more grateful for the people who stayed and for those who had the courage to walk away. The show's closing music began to play softly. As the credits rolled, snippets of social media posts flashed briefly on screen. Samuel L. Jackson just stormed off GMA. What a debate. George kept his cool, but Samuel had a point. Marriage isn't disposable. That's what real conversation looks like, raw, uncomfortable, honest. By the time the broadcast ended, hashtags like #Jackson versus George and #marriage debate were already trending online. Clips of Samuel's fiery speech were being shared across every platform, millions watching and weighing in from their couches, offices, and phones. Some called it an argument, others called it truth. But for everyone who saw it, it was unforgettable. As the Good Morning America logo faded to black, Robin's voice lingered. If you enjoyed this powerful moment, make sure to subscribe for more celebrity clashes, emotional debates, and unforgettable TV moments. And tell us below, should divorce laws be stricter or should love always come first? The screen cut to silence, and America kept talking.